Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the EverydayFI podcast, the show that explores the lives and stories of everyday people on the path to financial independence. Welcome to another edition of Mitch and Meg's Money Musings. Today, Mitch and I are going to talk about the familiar and notorious feeling, imposter syndrome. We talk about it with regards to work and careers, of course, but we actually explore it in other areas of our lives as well, including, on my end at least, the financial independence movement, and for both of us, having kids. I'm incredibly excited about this conversation and can't wait for you all to hear it right after you hear from our sponsors. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. Today, we're going to talk about imposter syndrome. And it's so funny because Mitch and I were going to talk about something else, but then I texted him and I was like, Mitch, I have this inspiration. Let's talk about imposter syndrome. So he's kind of along for the ride. Hey, Mitch, how you doing? What's going on with you today?
I'm doing well. It's very cold where I live, but you know what? We are fighting through it. We're used to it, and life is good. So I think this is a great subject. And the other episode we are supposed to record, I still am cool with that subject, but I'm not as proficient in it as it may appear. So this I love because I personally had my own struggles with it, and I love chatting through this stuff. It's fun to see what others see in us. And then on the flip side, I'm interested to be able to share whatever it is that I see from you that maybe I can help you overcome your own mindset that you may have towards imposter syndrome. So I'm excited. Let's roll.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to hear from you first because we were talking before we were recording about this really fun story that Mitch has. I'm not going to, spoiler alert anybody, but I want to know, Mitch, when you have felt imposter syndrome, specifically in your career, and how you feel about it now, and has it changed?
Yeah, it's super interesting. And this is kind of what I was getting at, where I said it's fun to hear from other people what they think of you because you were a little surprised that I had experienced any form of imposter syndrome. And the reality is, every moment of my working career, except for what I've been doing since I started back up to work in September, this is the only time I've not felt imposter syndrome. And so when I should maybe course correct a little bit because I was an adult and employed and selling electronics in a big box retail store. And actually, you know what? Even then, I felt like a little bit of an imposter because I was really good at sales, but I felt I was kind of lucky that I was outperforming everyone else. I thought I just had the right customers walk up. And it turns out I asked really good questions and I listened really carefully and I provided solutions to their challenges. And then they bought from me because people buy from who they know, like, and trust. But even back then, I kind of thought I was lucky. And it turns out I wasn't. So now I'm not in that position where I feel no imposter syndrome. And I got to be honest, freeing might be the right word. It's quite free and it's really enjoyable. So that's essentially where I'm at and where I've been. But yeah, it's a good spot to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny that you said that you felt lucky. I actually think that might be a pattern that feeds into imposter syndrome, that people, instead of recognizing that they're actually competent and talented, they think that they're just lucky. I talk about my foray into the tech world similarly. So I did a coding boot camp. We talked about this, a few episodes ago. I did a coding boot camp. And then from there, I had to basically find a job with no real world experience. I found a job at a startup here in Raleigh. The interview process was interesting because basically they had an apprenticeship type of deal where they would hire like 5 people who would apprentice as incoming developers. I didn't get that because the development language that I knew was different than the one that they were using. And so they didn't want me to come on board. So I basically was like, well, is there anything else? I really want to work for this company. I'll even be an intern for free if that works. They decided to bring me on as an intern paid, luckily, to basically extend the interview. One of the reasons why I feel like I was lucky in this is who I interviewed with. I might have mentioned this in a prior episode that the person that I interviewed with was head of the quality assurance department and not the head of the development department. So the CTO was actually out of town. And so they brought in a different person to interview me, and me and him clicked. And I don't think the other guy and me would have clicked because he was a very different kind of person. He was very by the book, very technical type of guy. Whereas Shannon was much more like, hey, I want to see who you are as a person and how you can grow. Like, I know you've got this knowledge, but how malleable and teachable are you? And so I felt like that was my lucky thing. And when I was brought into the company, when they had me doing development projects, because I didn't know the language they were using, I definitely felt like an imposter. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so there was a guy sitting next to me who was also new. And I'd be like, hey, can you help me with this? He's just like, help me do my job. So I think it's funny that luck comes into play in our ideas of imposter syndrome. I wonder where that comes from.
I don't know, but I think it's a really interesting story. And I know Brad on Choosify talks a lot about luck surface area. And I don't think that anything that you've described is maybe a direct, no, I don't think that's fair. So you did your boot camp and you got yourself into an interviewing scenario. And sure, you got lucky that the quote unquote wrong person interviewed you, but you did increase your luck surface area by being able to get into the company to even get into a conversation based on a coding background. So it's not like you just applied there and said, I'd like to be an intern. I'll pour your coffee. In the process, I'm going to learn a little bit about coding and eventually I might be qualified. But I was curious, did you have no imposter syndrome when you went into the art world where you were technically trained, or did you have it then as well?
I had probably more imposter syndrome in the art world than I did in the tech world. And here's why. The tech world, they are okay if you Google something in the tech world. If that's how you learn how to do something, they're cool with that. That's fine. In the art world in New York City, if you didn't go to NYU or Columbia or Yale or Harvard or one of those big fancy schools, or if you aren't, related to some family that people know in New York City, you're probably going to have a hard time making it in the art world unless you are very talented as an art historian, meaning you have incredible insights into stuff, are a really good writer, and make all of the connections. A lot of people say it's not what you know, it's who you know. It's both in art history. It's what you know and who you know and what initial chances you get. If you don't get those internships that are really going to set you off on the right career path, then it's probably not going to work. And that's kind of what happened to me. I wanted to land internships at the museums that I wanted to work at, mainly the Met, and they filled up with other people. So I had to go to a different museum that was not quite in line with my major, the kind of art that I was studying. It took me off on a path that didn't really make a lot of sense. Then I worked at a museum that was completely different art. It was East Asian art. And my art that I wanted to study was European Middle Ages. So very different. To a person in the art world, they're looking at my resume and they're like, you got a hodgepodge going on. You got a couple state schools, and I'm reading your master's thesis, which is an interesting idea, but it's not very well executed. So no thanks. So it wasn't even really imposter syndrome. I actually probably was an imposter.
As I heard your story develop, and you said, okay, I did have this unique resume that didn't fit in any one place, but I originally had wrote down, maybe it's not what you know, it's how you feel about what you know. And then I made a note of like, how could we overcome this? And I realized I think some of the reason we can overcome this is who we surround ourselves with outside of the immediate echo chamber. And so I'll maybe just tease that and we can share it a little more later.
Well, that's a good point, because I feel like in my early career, I made a lot of what I call mistakes. But now that I'm older, I'm like, they're not mistakes. It's that I didn't have the right people on my team to help me along the way, because I was a kid. I was 23 years old, especially in a huge city that you've never been to and a very elite type of career path. I didn't have the right people on my team or on my side. And so I think you're right. If you have the right people around you who can really help you, that can also increase that luck surface area, which, by the way, to explain that for the audience, that just means setting yourself up for opportunities. I'll give you an example. If I took the coding boot camp and just waited for people to call me after sending out a couple of resumes, that is a very low luck surface areas. But what I did was I sent out resumes and went to career fairs and thought outside the box when I had interviews when they didn't want to take me on board. That's what increased the luck surface area because I was creating more chances for success. But I want to know, now that you are no longer in an imposter syndrome situation, why don't you feel that now, but you did before?
Yeah, so it's an interesting deal. So when I was running the business, I was truly running it. I had a good sized team and all of that. We were making very solid numbers, very good numbers. We were in the top, whatever, 5%, 8% of all locations in the entire country at all times. Part of my imposter syndrome was because there were new people rising up and coming up within the organization. And this is what happens naturally. New people come in and they get to start from a different baseline than where I started. When I started, it was kind of child's play, right? And then we figured out how to build this business and we looked like the machine. And then new people came in that were probably maybe more qualified. They were certainly more experienced than I was when I started doing some of my leadership roles. And so they would see what we were doing and they believed it was possible because they saw it, right? And so I don't want to take it away from them because it wasn't easier, but maybe it was easier because they could see, oh my gosh, this is where it already is. Imagine where it could go. Like upper glass ceiling to shatter was way higher than mine. And so that was part of my old version of imposter syndrome is we had been number one, number two, always. It wasn't even a question. We were going to the Super Bowl every year. That's how our market was. And then these newbies showed up and started really, really doing some impressive things. And I'm so happy for them, grateful for them, proud of them. They've done some really awesome things in their market. So I think part of it was just like, hey, I used to be the guy. And now I'm one of the guys, and I'm certainly on the lower end of results of quote unquote the guys that are running these businesses and the gals. There's two really awesome gals that are driving a couple of these. So that's kind of where I was mentally. And then immediately in my actual business that I was running, for me, it was really tough because I felt like I did a great job of understanding my people, knowing my people, giving them credit where credit was due, truly wanting the best for them, but never getting a feedback loop of, hey, Mitch, you know what? You are a great boss to work for, a great leader to work for, and I want to run through that wall for you. I would sometimes get the, man, I really enjoy working with you. Thank you so much for what you do, but not the other part of, I want to go run through that wall for you. And so I start, why are these other leaders getting their people to run through walls for them? And I'm not. A little bit of imposter syndrome for that. But where I am today is I'm helping coach the entire organization. So like 104 locations. I'm helping them understand how to build these fundamentals, how to set themselves up for success so that they can bring in excellent people who want to go run through those walls. And I'm getting this feedback loop that I was wishing I'd had before. I have people calling me and texting me and emailing me. I had somebody mail me a dry ice cooler package with something special to their town and place as a thank you for the new energy that I brought to this business. And so when you get all of that back, and basically, it's not that I can do no wrong, but essentially everything that I do, I have somewhere between 10 to 20 people on the small end and 40 to 60 people just absolutely clamoring for my time and attention and thanking me for what I'm doing. So that's a really interesting spot to be. And I would feel crazy if I didn't feel like I'd earned that at this point. So I think that's why it's mostly gone.
So, okay, you start your career, you kind of are learning as you go, you're a little new and you're learning on the job. And then, like you said, these people come in and they're at a different level. And now the company's grown, they're able to attract these more senior level people, right? And then you're comparing yourself to them now. And that's where the root of the imposter syndrome comes from, is that comparison. Then fast forward, you become that expert who is coming in and is now at that different baseline. And so the imposter syndrome isn't there because you're the person people are probably comparing themselves to. What do you think about that interpretation?
It's probably pretty accurate. Now, the top markets, the same people that I was talking about, where I feel like they were leveled up and I was on the tail end of this new level, and that's a great spot to be, right? And then there's everyone else, and everyone else is trying to figure out how to look like we all looked in that group, and they're like, "Hey, I'd be happy to look like I belonged in your group. Imagine, I'd be so happy to be there." So I have all these people that are looking for systems, for processes to stabilize and what I call control chaos within their business. And I've got the answers to the test that they all want. So, yeah, I don't think you're off at all. I have a sports analogy, but I'm trying to leave it alone because you once said to me sport ball, which is like the universal sign that you don't care about athletics.
It's not that I don't care, it's that I probably won't understand it, but I totally do the analogy because other people in the audience will probably get it. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, and for people that follow the NFL, Peyton Manning was an incredible quarterback, but he was kind of immobile. He stayed in the pocket. He would pick apart defenses. He would make a decision, make a throw, and it would work, right? And defenses have gotten better. And now that doesn't quite work as well in today's NFL as it used to. And so I kind of think of myself as like a less than Peyton Manning, that like everybody was like, this guy is the king, right? Like I was never the king, but I really was very, very good. And now these new quarterbacks, I'm sure you'll know these names: Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. Oh, you're shaking your head. No, you don't even know who those people are. That's amazing. These guys they're mobile, they're dynamic, they move all over the field. And it's just a different version of the NFL today. And I just feel like, you know what? I've reached my point, and it's okay. I'm comfortable moving on and being the armchair quarterback and the sideline coach. So that's for the audience. I hope somebody out there respects it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure somebody's like, yeah, I know all those names. I literally knew none of them. I knew Peyton Manning. I didn't know who that was, but I didn't know the other people. I wonder if what would help with imposter syndrome is a mindset shift. Instead of comparing ourselves to these people who are coming in who are better than us, learning from them instead of compare, like seeing that as an opportunity to learn instead of oh no, I'm not good. And it's so funny that you're saying this because I'm like, is this a pattern in business? Because it's literally happening to me in my job right now, because the product team that I'm on right now is actually relatively new. The VP of product, I think, started at the company only a year and a half ago, and he was the first product person. And then my boss was his first hire, and he, I think, has only been there for about a year now, maybe a little more. And the VP has basically been building the product team from there. And I was one of the newer people that they brought on last March. I think there were 3 product people, and I was the 4th. And I've been there for about 10 months now, and they just hired 2 more product managers, and they're both senior level, and they have oodles of years of experience in the industry that our company is for. And I have none. I have 0 experience in this industry. And as a product manager, I'm good, but I do only have around 5 years under my belt versus these people have like 8, 9, 10. And I have literally been questioning why they hired me, because I don't have what these other people have. And I'm seeing this in your story. I wonder if I should shift my mindset and learn from these people and try to get to their level and show the VP that he was right in hiring me, because I might not have the industry experience, but I can still excel and still get to that level with, his guidance and the team's guidance.
I hope that you can look at the things that are different about your story and recognize the strengths that they may provide, because these people have all the industry knowledge, but that's what quote unquote everybody has. That could be like table stakes, but maybe part of the reason they like having you where you are is because you're shapeable. And so, like for me in my world, I don't like to bring in people directly from the primary industry that I'm in, because I have to break a ton of habits and I have to deal with a lot of ego. And so maybe if you're a little more, I don't know, gun shy or a little less comfortable in final decision making, you're maybe more likely to ask questions, more likely to engage with the higher ups, and more likely to take in the best answer. And sometimes that's what the best manager is. The best sales executive doesn't always make the best sales manager because their egos are too big. and they want to go and pound down walls, and they don't want to be patient enough to deal with the headaches that come with being a manager. And maybe that's precisely what you're built for, is to listen more and look for the best solution instead of having the best solution. And so, like, a little mantra that I've always had is, I don't care about being right. I only care about what's right. And so when I can set my ego aside and that my idea is the best idea, I literally don't care. I don't care if it's my idea. One of the groundbreaking changes within how we operate a piece of our business came from the lowest paid person in our organization. After we were debriefing why we lost a client, breaking it all down, we got through the whole meeting. And at the very end, anything else, guys, anything else? I feel like we're missing something. Lowest paid guy in the room finally speaks up, and he goes, and he went on to tell a story. And I looked at him, I said, now? You waited until now to tell me that? Like, that's the answer. And then that became the sign that we hung on our wall for like 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 months until it became culture, until it became habit. That's how we dealt with that kind of client. So maybe that's you. Maybe you're sitting in the chair because you're supposed to be there, not because you're lucky, but because you're the one that's shapeable, moldable, willing to listen, and doesn't care about being the gal with all the answers. You care about collecting all the best answers and making a good decision that's directly going to get you all where you need to go.
Yeah, I love that story. You're so inspiring. I'm so glad that you are on the show with me, because I'm like, oh my God, you're right. Because a lot of times in corporate, the expectation is that you pander to the executives, right? You tell them what they want to hear. And first of all, that's not my personality. There's some people who have who they are as a person and then who they are in corporate America. I don't have these two people. I'm just one person. And I think when I'm looking at what they're doing right now at my company, I'm like, why are we doing it this way? This really feels dumb. But I don't have the confidence to say that because of the imposter syndrome. So I'm wondering if there's a way that I can meet with my VP and say, hey, like, I know that I am the lower rung person here, but here's what I'm seeing. And here's the alternative that I thought about with another lower rung person. And I were talking about this the other day. Here's what we are seeing and what we would do if we ran this company. This is what we would do. Have y'all considered this? And if so, why aren't you doing this? Like, I'm actually inspired to literally put a one-on-one on his calendar right now after we're done to have that conversation. So thank you for that. So it's awesome.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad that this is helpful, because this is the kind of stuff that I like to do. I like to listen. I like to kind of coach, and I like to see other people win. And so the one thing I would say is, you got to make sure you really know your boss, your supervisor, your VP, whoever this was that you said that you're thinking about setting a one-to-one with, because we need to know that they want that feedback, right? And so I have a new boss who just got hired. He's brand new to our industry, but he has some experience because he happened to coach one of the markets as like a hired paid coach. And when he was being interviewed to come into the company, it was a two-way interview. And so we, the executives, interviewed him, and he was interviewing the company to make sure it was the right fit for him to come on, and that this was really what he wanted to do. And one of the things I told him, as I said, for better or for worse, I'm going to be your best or your worst employee, because I don't have this filter. Like, professionally, yes, I have a filter. I'm not going to say exactly what I'm thinking. I'm not going to break HR rules in a moment that I'm frustrated, but I don't have the normal filter, and I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear. I'm literally here working because I want to be here. And if that bothers you, that could be a problem. And the second thing that I could see bothering you and could be a problem for me is, I really hope you're humble enough to see me as a very strong asset and not a threat, because I'm not interested in your job or role. I'm not interested in doing or saying the things that make you feel like I'm pumping your ego up. You may feel that way, but I'm doing it or saying it because it serves the people that I am paid to serve, that are going to rise the company up, and it's going to make us all look good. But it's not going to be because I'm doing it to make you look good. And then maybe it also happens to serve those people, because frankly, I will respect you as long as it's earned and it's a two-way street. But I'm not just going to do it to try and make you happy, because I'm here because I want to be here. And it's a really interesting and powerful spot to be.
Okay, so you've said all this, and
Yeah.
we've teased the audience. So now tell them you're basically the guy in Office Space who is like, you know what? I'm going to do this job the way that I want to do it. I'm going to stop pandering. I'm going to stop doing what everybody asks me. And then what happens? He gets promoted, right? So I want to hear that story that you told me before we hit record, because I'm sure everybody wants to know about it.
So yeah, to step back in time a little bit, I know people have probably heard some of my previous episodes here with Megan. So I had been running this business, a location, and I was in charge of it. I owned part of it. And I went to my CEO who owned the business that I partnered with, and I quit. And I said, I'm done. I'm taking 3 months off. I'm going off for the summer. But when I come back, I really hope we can find a way to make something work. I'd love to work with you at the corporate office at the franchisor to be in some sort of support role. And I had no idea what was going to happen. And then before I even left for the summer, we found this new role. I'm in that role today. So here I am. And now we just hired our new president, who's my boss, that I just kind of referred to in the previous comments. And it would turn out that, he's got a time limit. He's not all that far from traditional retirement age. And so my CEO, who I quit on 8 months ago, and I rejoined his team, came to me and said, I would really like you to consider moving down here to where our corporate office is, because I work remote. I'd really like you to consider moving down here and taking over as the president when your new boss retires in a handful of years. And I looked at him and I didn't even say anything. And he goes, I knew you were going to say no. And I said, yeah, I really mean it when I say that I'm here because I want to be here. And I gave up that kind of responsibility once already. And I can't see myself ever wanting to do that. And he goes, well, you know what kind of money it is, right? And I said, yeah, I think so. I'm going to leave the number out, but I'm just going to tell the audience, it's a big number. it's a very big number. And I just said, it's not for me. So it's really interesting to be this person who I'm never disrespectful. I'm never just saying like, if Megan's my boss, it's easy to talk to her because I'm looking at her on the screen. Megan, your idea is stupid and I am never going to do it. What I might say is, hey, Megan, at first glance, I'm going to be honest with you. That kind of sounds dumb to me. It sounds stupid and it sounds crazy. And here's my reasons why. And I might go boom, boom, boom. But before I just shut it down, can you help me understand what I'm missing? What are you seeing from your view? And then I'm going to go right back onto the defense if I think that's what's right. And then I'll come away telling you if I think, you know what, you've converted me, I'm in. Or I'm going to be like, nah, I don't think this is it. So that's the world that I operate in. And somehow, some way, there was still a conversation of, hey, you want to move down here and take over? And I'm like, hard pass. So there you go. It's a bizarre world that we live in. But you know what? Even after being informally offered this future, right? I still would have had to do some stuff to earn it. I ended up circling back and I said, you know what? I am so flattered and appreciative that you thought of me for that. My friends in my group, this kind of group that I referred to earlier that I have outside of work, have all said, well, why don't you just become the president? Like, you're clearly one of the more capable people. And I always said, I'm somewhere between 40 and 60% qualified for that role. But this other remaining piece would probably require education and honestly, just like big experience that I don't have. And I'm completely content with that. And so I told that to the CEO. He goes, man, one of these days you got to learn to think of yourself the way we all think of you. And he's like, I 100% believe in you. And there's some stuff you'd have to work on for sure, but I have no concerns that you would be there by the time that it comes. And again, I'm not going to cash in on it unless something completely wild changes, but really no real interest. So this is a fun subject. I know I've seen that it's helping you, but also it's kind of boosting me up a little bit too. This isn't such a bad Saturday.
Yeah, I'm glad. It's one of those things where, I knew I'd want to talk to you about this because I knew you'd have certain kinds of perspectives. I'm honestly seeing some of these recordings that we've done. You're almost like coaching me on stuff. And just, this is so funny, y'all in the audience. I'm pretty sure Mitch and I are the exact same age. I'm about to turn 38 in February. Mitch, I think you're 38. We're the same age, but we're at such different points in our lives because I took a detour on my career. because we're still peer age, but also he has more experience, I'm kind of taking advantage of using him as a coach.
It's funny you say that. I told my wife, I told Liz earlier this week, I said, yeah, Megan shifted our topic from what we were supposed to do to imposter syndrome. I think I'm accidentally becoming an on-air life and career coach. And it's fun. She goes, that's perfect for you. You should do that.
I'm very sorry. Hopefully you don't feel like I'm taking advantage of you. It's more that you just I feel like whatever I'm learning, the audience is learning from you.
Yeah.
And I hope, in the future when we have more episodes, I can be a coach for you for something. I don't know what that'll be, but maybe there's some things I can do to help you as well, or we can talk through or something like that. I don't have coach energy, I don't think, but yeah, I hope we can do that. I just want to say that because I really appreciate it. I really value spending this kind of time with you and that you are willing to do this and help me and the audience. I'm going to let you know what happens with that conversation. I know you said it depends on what kind of person this VP is. He has actually said to me as a piece of feedback that I need to push back and speak up more. So this is going to be my opportunity where I'm going to do exactly what you said here. I'm not going to probably say stupid or anything like that, but I am going to say, here's how I'm viewing this. And before I say any more, I want to understand from your perspective, why this, and why haven't you tried this? And then just stop and let him talk. And then write down, like I'm doing right now, responses and more follow-up questions. And then when he's done talking, I'll be like, okay, I have some notes that I want to go through and some follow-up questions. And I also want to make sure he has time to do this because he's a very busy VP. And so I'll probably set the expectation before the meeting. Hey, I want to have a really deep conversation about this. So can you please make some real time for this? So
yeah. For sure. Laptop closed, El Jefe, and let's have a good conversation. I don't know if this will resonate with your supervisor or not, but when you go to speak with them and lead into, hey, I've got some feedback, it might be, hey, in my review or in some of our ongoing discussions, you've challenged me to be more open, more direct, and push back a little bit. And so for better or for worse, I'm going to hold you accountable to those words right here. And honestly, just the way that I said that, like smiling, making the eye contact and laughing through it a little bit, I think is very disarming because sometimes I wonder when managers say that, do they mean it? Or do they just say it? Nobody can see this, but the reaction from Megan was strong right there. So yeah, I like to lead into that because it really can soften it and it can start from a safer place and be disarming. I'm curious, outside of the work world, where else are you experiencing imposter syndrome, like IRL, like out in the wild? Where is this coming up in your life?
yeah. So one of the reasons, audience, I brought this up to do an episode on imposter syndrome was actually not because of the career stuff. Like, yeah, sure, career stuff is there. But because I've been recording with so many amazing people in this community and hearing their stories, there are some patterns that have come up. How people in this community see money, view money, save money. And a lot of the time, people are overly frugal and they save so much money and deny themselves so much to the point where they're like, I reached financial independence and then I had to unlearn that and learn to spend. And I have actually started feeling like an imposter in the FI movement because that is not who I am at all. I have always been a huge spender. And I was actually telling Mitch before we started recording that I'm having a problem with spending right now. I had to take Pinterest off my phone because basically Pinterest is a shopping app now. It used to be, looking through really pretty images, but now it's like, hey, we saw that you liked this picture where this girl was wearing this stuff. Here's 3 different advertisements for all of the different clothes that were in this picture. And also, I was trying out meal delivery services, which are actually really expensive in an effort to hack my diet, which is a different topic, but I was trying to automate my diet, kind of like automating savings, but it's definitely really expensive. And then I even signed up for something called Stitch Fix, which is you basically have a stylist who sends you a box of clothes every month. And one of the reasons I did that is because I'm struggling with some weight gain from going through early menopause, which is another topic for another day. Don't worry, I won't leave you hanging on that, but we're not going to talk about that today. And I'm just having these struggles with spending and then interviewing all these incredibly amazing people in this community and thinking to myself, do I really belong here? Am I really the right person to be like doing this podcast or even in this community? I'm definitely not at a 50% savings rate and I struggle with spending all the time. And so I don't know, Mitch, if you've ever felt like that. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I was very excited to hear this because before we recorded, I asked you not to tell me. I literally laughed when you texted it to me that you kind of felt like you were an imposter in the FI space. And I think I had just parked after driving to go speak to a group of students about investing in real estate. And I listened to you on the way up there, and it was your New Year's episode where you talked about your meal kits. And I thought, boy, that's expensive. And it sounds like you've come around full circle to recognizing it. But I see this message from you and I kind of laughed. And I'm like, you have a successful podcast going. You have like this brand that you've built online. You have a ton of followers. You've reached a level where you're getting ad revenue, which takes a strong number of downloads and listens. And somehow you're sitting over here deciding that maybe you don't belong. And so here's what I'll say to actually respond live in the moment to what you said. I was listening carefully. This whole frugality, extreme, living life in a way so that you can hurry up to a finish line, and this almost competition of who can get there the quickest and who can wear their miser patch on their shirt with pride. But you're talking to the guy that says, that ain't me. And what's interesting is I think we all go through that thought process when we first find FI and we maybe strip away too much. And then we go, whoops, and we invite these things back in. And I know you went through some version of that because I remember you talking about it when we first either met in Vegas or when we talked on that episode together, whichever it was. And I think what's interesting is some people feel like they have to stay in that space to truly fit in the movement. And I think that that is a character that we need to recognize exists in the FI world, but not feel like we need to be, right? I don't understand how we can't have both or heck, all three. You and I are in a group chat, and there's someone in that group chat that is so far the other direction on income and FI number and lifestyle that they're shooting for, and all the power to them. But I have no desire to try and do that. And I just turned down a job that could put me in that conversation, right? Like, the number from off air, it could eventually put me in that conversation. So I would just say all things can exist. And I think there's a lot of people, to your point, that are trying to unwind what they've done. They've turned themselves into this non-spender and they go, oops, I've got too much money, and they can't even enjoy it. I think you've actually maybe found this balance, and it's good that you're recognizing that you can get off the rails and go a little off the deep end here and there. Recognize it, fix it, and move on. But I don't think there's anything about your savings rate, the dollar amount you're putting in, how it compares to your income, that even comes close to putting you out of the FI movement. And if anything else, I think you're closer to living out this new character of FI that's risen up with the whole die with zero concept, where you're saying, hey, I'm going to save enough. I'm going to take care of 65-year-old Megan. And then as my income goes up, I have to decide how much of it am I going to play with, and how much am I going to move from 65-year-old Megan is taken care of to 60 to 55 to 50, and finding that balance along the way. So I would just say, if you can maybe start to, like how they say, win your morning, right? Wake up with gratitude and put out good things into the world. Maybe that's something to think on or meditate on in the morning, is that where you do belong, and that it's just your version.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm doing that thing where I'm comparing myself to these people. And we all have default poor habits when it comes to money, whether it is uber frugality or uber spending. And I guess I wish that my poor money habit was the uber frugality, because I feel like that's a better poor habit than the spending. And I am curious how people in this movement are able to not be swayed by the Joneses, because I feel like sometimes I still get swayed by them. For example, I could give two craps about a car, right? I don't care about cars. I have a 12-year-old Prius. I love her. She's so cute. She's little and red, and I never want her to die. However, Chris and Mai's lifestyle has come to a point where we need an all-wheel drive car. And I've been shopping for them. And by shopping, I don't mean I'm going to dealers, but I'm looking online and I'm like, look at this beautiful 2021 RAV4. Oh my God, it's so sexy. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? I don't even care about cars and I'm calling cars sexy. What's going on? So I guess I'm just like, how do you not get swayed by that? You know, do you just completely remove yourself from society? How are people doing this? How do you do this, Mitch? And have you ever had these feelings of, do I belong in this movement? Am I doing things exactly perfectly to what a FI person would do?
The closest I've ever felt to not fitting in was in the real estate investors world, because when I first found anything to do with financial independence, it was after being really interested in rental properties. And we had bought our first one and it was a great deal. And then I kept looking for the next one and I couldn't find it. And there's all these metrics and there's these different ways, and you don't look for them on Zillow.com. You mail out letters and you talk to people and you go to real estate meetups. And I just didn't find myself wanting to do the things that it took to put myself in a spot to truly, quote unquote, be a real estate investor and grow that portfolio. And so I felt there like maybe I didn't belong. But in the FI world, I've never felt that way, except when I've been immediately surrounded by a bunch of FI people. So like I've gone to some FI meetups, and they never made me feel this way. I actually would just be like, I just don't do that. Like I can't wrap my head around that. Like I'm not going to drive a 12-year-old Prius. Like I commend you for that. I wouldn't do it. I don't know. So no, I guess the answer is I just don't feel that way, even though there's been phases of our FI life where we've had a 25% savings rate. And there's been phases where if you count like my equity exit that I'm dealing with right now, we have like an 88 to 90% savings rate. And it's insane. And we've been everywhere in between. So I don't know if I've ever felt like I don't fit in, but I would just remind you that I think there's kind of like three unofficial characters of FI. There's the extreme side that you're talking about that you feel like is making you think you don't belong. There's somewhere in the middle of the spectrum where it's like, I'm going to live my life and I'm going to enjoy it and I'm going to spend up, but I'm going to make decisions with intention. And then there's just like the gangbusters, I'm going to be uber wealthy, which is, I still think, a version of the FI that we know. It's just very different, and it's probably not what most of us are chasing. So I hope that helps in some way.
Yeah, it does. And I still have the question of how do you, if you're in that middle zone, which I think you are, where I'm going to spend up, but I'm going to spend intentionally, how do you know, like, I guess what's hard for me is I did a exercise with Chris last weekend where we wrote out our values. I went and saw Ramit Sethi 2 weeks ago in DC, stayed with Ashley and David, who are in the FI movement. People know David as the Mr. Quit your job guy, and who comes to the Camp Fies and tells people to quit their jobs. But they let me stay with them. And Ashley and I went and saw Ramit, and I got Ramit's Money for Couples book. And in the book, there's a chapter on creating the vision for your life. And there's 4 activities in it. But I told Chris, can we do one of these because we're, engaged now and gonna get married, and we haven't fully meshed our finances yet. And so Chris was like, where do we want to start? Do we want to start with combining our checking accounts? I was like, no. We need to start up here. We need to start with a vision and get on the same page and get aligned and basically see if we have any glaring differences in how we want our life to go and talk about those. And then we can, at the end of this, have some action steps to start combining our finances and stuff like that. And when I did that, the first question was, what are your top 5 values? And Chris was like, writing, put them all up there really fast. And I was like sitting here staring at my sticky notes. What are my values? It's like I don't know myself. And I kind of struggled with it. And I actually talked to my therapist about this. I feel like I don't know myself sometimes. And I say all this because whenever people talk about spending intentionally, I can always find a reason, and I can always tie that back to some sort of value that I have. But I'm like, is it real or is it the Joneses? And
Mhm.
so I guess what I'm asking you is how do you approach this and how do you really know what your values are? Do they ever change? I don't know. For some reason I'm struggling with this and I don't know why.
So forced to think on the spot. This will either be you're either going to be like I'm writing that down, or it's like one of the dumb things that I say. And I think you need a what you said no to list. So I think that what I'm maybe observing is like many people, we are our own worst critic. And I think you're being too hard on yourself. And so maybe you say yes to some things and then you find a reason to justify them later. And in some cases, you probably learned from them, right? You at one point had a reason that ordering the meal kits were a great reason. They solved this need. But then eventually you went, wait a minute, this is interfering with my true value, with my true goal, with my true big picture thing. And it sounds like you're figuring out how to wind that down and undo that change. So you learned, you evolved, you pivoted, and you made a better decision. So be it. I'd be curious if you could start to create like a trigger where you just keep a notepad in your phone and write down everything you say no to. Because I bet you the list of everything you say no to is so much higher than the things that you said yes to, let alone the yes tos that you accidentally regret later. And then you probably shouldn't regret them because they're just opportunities that you learn from and you get better and refine and figure out. So, how do I deal with it? I think I say no to a lot of stuff. I really do. I say no to so many things. I feel like we say no to stuff all the time. I think just by choosing, I used to say this to my brother when he was asking me for some basic feedback about money and finances. I'd say the way you got to think about your money is it's not what can you afford, okay? Because the bank's going to tell you you can afford a $500,000 house, but you really only ought to be in a $250,000 house, right? So I would tell him I could drive a Tesla Model X. I choose to drive a 2017 used Lincoln MKZ, which is an all-wheel drive vehicle, by the way. And that's what I choose to drive. I'm not choosing to drive your Prius, Megan. I'm leaving you on your own in that rickety old bucket that you drive. I'm not interested in that. But
Hey.
I'm not interested in that. But I choose to say no to more than I think I do. I choose to not upgrade my house. And I hope you choose to. Well, I know you won't upgrade your house. I'm pretty confident you won't because you're already living out the man houses are expensive thing. Can you imagine if you had a bigger one? Right? Like, so I think we say no to a lot. My friends have literally asked me, when are you going to sell your house and move up to the next one? I go, never. Why would I introduce more into my life that I do not need and would force me to have to work longer or earn more or whatever? I'm not interested. So I think maybe I say no to more than I give myself credit for. And I bet you do too, is the long story short. But maybe guardrails is your thing and then I'll be done. So like you mentioned shopping for all-wheel drive vehicles. Maybe the answer is you set the parameters of I am not spending more than X and I'm not spending less than Y because you're not going to drive some beater except for the Prius that you're rolling in. And maybe set those parameters so that you don't get cars fed to you that don't fit your established values. And then if you need to from there, because you learn, oh shoot, I can't get what I need for $18,000, we move the needle and see what's available for 20, and see where that goes.
Yeah, guardrails I think are really helpful and it calms your monkey brain down or your lizard brain or whatever brain that is that's like trying to take control. I compare money and diets so much because I feel like it's the same part of your brain where you have to make a decision that's good for you and it's hard. And that's one of the reasons why I was trying to like automate my food because I was like, it's like automating my savings because your lizard brain can get in the way so much. And that's why I took all those shopping apps off my phone because now that they're not there, I haven't spent any money in the last, like, I took it off 3 days ago and I haven't spent any money since then. It's, yeah, I have nothing else to say to that. It's definitely guardrails. It's just that you have to know how to put them in place. And I feel like, not to get on my high horse, but I feel like our country and the capitalism that's at play and the fact that all of these apps and all of these companies want you to spend more and more and more and upgrade and upgrade and upgrade, it's getting harder to fight that, right? Because they're inventing new ways to make you spend money, or I say make you, but make you want to spend money. And for people who aren't practiced in the art of not spending money, it's hard.
Yeah.
And I am not practiced in that. I am, like I said, I'm not the frugal type. And so I think you're right. I think I need to give myself a little more grace and love and compassion, because the fact that I even recognized that I'm doing this and need to figure out why I'm doing it and change the behavior is more than a lot of people can do.
Yeah. Well, that's good stuff. The only other subject kind of outside of the work world that I'm familiar with personally that I can directly think of imposter syndrome for is a combination of parenting and coaching, which in some ways I feel like are synonymous. Friends that will reach out to me. Speaking of this group thing that I kind of teased earlier on, one of my friends said that he read somewhere that you should have a personal board of directors that have nothing to do with your immediate work circumstance. And maybe even they aren't really close to your tight knit friend group. I have a couple that violate those rules. They're not in my workspace, but they're either a family member or very close to my friend and family unit. But having that personal board of directors is somebody that I really think helps when you go to them with a challenge about your business or about your work or about whatever it is that you're dealing with. And just getting an outsider's perspective, all of a sudden, if they're good people, they're probably going to make you realize, wait a minute, I'm doing way better than I think I am, or I wasn't really that far off. And they just helped me see this little gap. I think it's why masterminds are so powerful. I've been in a mastermind since sometime this summer. I was driving, I remember towing the camper and listening in to the first one. And it's amazing when you get these, we have like 8 or 9 business owners. None of us have anything in common from the underlying business, yet we all take away so much because of unique perspectives. So either being that coach and them going, holy cow, Mitch, like that was the answer I needed. Thank you so much. Or I never saw it that way. I'm so glad I brought this to you. I'm kind of like, hey, you know what? I can help people. I mean, heck, even during this conversation, you're like, I kind of feel like I'm taking advantage of you. You're not. This is fun. But man, parenting sometimes is just coaching. It's really interesting. I remember saying either before we were parents or right after that, I always felt like I needed to lead my kid, not tell him what to do, not bark at him and give him orders. It was, I want to lead him, because leadership is how you get people to do what you want, even if they don't always believe it's what's best for them. And so I always wanted to lead him, but it's humbling, man. You go and like, you get ready to leave the hospital and they're like, he's all yours. And you're like, you sure? Like, have you met me? You drive home, you're like, man, on the way here, I drove 68 miles an hour, speed limit 55, not because I was in a hurry, but it's just because of how I roll. Now he's in the back seat and I'm going 50 in a 55, with 2 hands, 10 and 2, clutch to the wheel, tense. And then you get home and you're responsible for him. And I think it was like day 4 or 5. He's freaking out. He's melting down. He's an infant, right? Newborn, they do what they do. And my mother-in-law said, hey, try this. And we did it and it worked. And we're like, oh, her experience. Like she figured it out because she's a mom of 4, but she probably figured it out after 1. And then we reached out to my mom about something. And it's one of the best pieces of advice my mom's ever given me. She said, either you run them or they'll run you. And I thought, that is leadership. There's this quote I love. The only difference between leadership and manipulation is if there's mutual benefit. And so I'm not manipulating my child into being a better version of himself. I'm leading him into being a better version of himself. It's good for him and it's good for me. And so when she said that you run them or they'll run you, man, did that sink in. And, I still look around and say, maybe I look at my phone too much during my child's waking hours. Some days I don't want to hang out with them, even though I have the time and I should want to hang out with them. But like we as parents have, needs and desires too, that we're just not every day are we up for it. And that's okay. But in those moments, sometimes I'm like, I'm really like a good parent because like I don't really feel like building Legos with him right now, and that just it's a weird feeling, but it's one other area that comes up. And I don't know if you have anything else, if any of that resonates with you or sticks with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a parent, so I can't speak to this on an actual real basis, but I've definitely had the moment. I feel like I should not be allowed to have a child because I'm a child myself, even though I'm 38. Like I'm 38, I own property, I have a business, but having a child seems like the most important and challenging thing that I will ever do, because I am molding a human being. I am going to be one of the reasons that they are either stable, well-adjusted, and happy as an adult or not. And that's a lot of pressure, right? That's a lot of pressure. And, there's all the nature versus nurture conversations, of course. I will say, though, this is an area where even though it scares me, I actually have an inkling, and I don't want to seem conceited, especially since I don't have the actual experience of being a parent, but I have an inkling that I am going to be a good parent because of the fact that I've been in therapy for 8 years. I wish my parents had been in therapy, and I wish my parents were in therapy now, because what happens is if a parent is not in therapy, is not working on improving themselves, is not addressing trauma that they had as children, they will start to put that on their kid. And that's what happened to me. And that is what scared me about having kids when I was younger and why I never wanted to have kids. And my therapist actually said, "Do you think the reason you don't want to have kids is because of your parents?" And I was like, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't ever want to be the type of parents that I had. Nowadays, I'm very close to my mom. My mom's great and I love being around her. And I understand as an adult what she was going through. She was a single mother by herself, had no help. My dad didn't pay child support because he didn't legally have to. And it was hard. And then she went through some really scary health stuff by herself with two kids. And so I get it, but it doesn't mean that my life as a child was great because she was going through all of this stuff. And so it just trickled down to us as kids. And so it always scared me. But now that I'm in therapy and I've worked on myself and I know that I have the ability to reflect on some of the decisions I make or some of the responses that I have to things in my personal life that I can tell are coming from a place in me that is derived from trauma, I know how to process that and stop it in its tracks. And it's very funny because it's almost like, what would Mary say? And Mary's my therapist. And it's very much like, what would Jesus do? But it's like, what would Mary say? And I can channel her because she's been my therapist for 8 years. Like I've had one therapist for 8 years. And I don't know, I'm hoping I'm right. I don't want to be overconfident, but I also feel like this might be an area where maybe I don't get the imposter syndrome as badly as with work, which makes me really happy because, like I said, to me, this is the most important thing I will ever do. So,
Yeah. Well, I think that closing remark, the reminder, this is the most important thing you'll ever do, paired with there's fear and there's healthy fear. And I think you've got a healthy fear paired with awareness. And as long as you can put all that together, I mean, heck, even without it, I'm sure you'll be just fine. But like, it's when you recognize those things, you say, I know what I don't want to be, and I have an idea of what I would like to be, and I'm open to learning along the way, probably be just fine. So I trust you'll be just fine when that day comes.
yeah, for sure. And I think that that is the lesson for imposter syndrome in general. Maybe we should switch that mindset from comparison to learning and know that we've got this no matter what it is. So, yeah. Thanks so much, Mitch. This has been awesome. And thanks for switching it up last minute.
I hope this helps some people out. I'd be really interested to see if you hear anything from anybody on this specific episode, because I think it is one of those things where hopefully someone's driving down the road listening to this, and whenever they safely park and can take a second to jot some notes down, whether they're a journaler or they're like me that they email themselves to remember to think about or do something later, I'd be really interested to see what, if anything, people take away from this. So like whether you get comments somewhere that I don't pay attention to or see because I'm not super heavy on social, I would be very interested to hear if anything big comes out of this episode from people that makes a difference or an adjustment in their lives.
Yeah. And for people, if you do want to tell your experiences with imposter syndrome, a great place is when you are on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you go to the show notes, I have the episode webpage linked as the first link in every single episode. So you'll go straight to the website where the episode webpage is and you can leave a comment, or on YouTube, I am on YouTube, you can leave comments there. So those are the two places that you can leave comments and reach out and talk to us about this, because I would love to hear your experiences with imposter syndrome. And if you have any advice, I'd love to hear it. So Yeah. Thanks, Mitch, for being here. And yeah, I'll see you around. I'll see you in the next Mitch and Meg's Money Musings episode.
Thanks for letting me do it.
Thanks for listening to the EverydayFI podcast. If you're loving the show, here are some things you can do. Number 1, subscribe in your favorite podcast player and share the show with your friends and family. Number 2, please leave a review. I'm always looking for ways to improve the show. Number 3, check out my website, EverydayFI.com, where you can listen to all the episodes and leave comments for myself and the guest. Number 4, if you're interested in sharing your own financial independence story, you can find a submission form at everyday-fi.com/podcast. And finally, number 5, join my Patreon membership for only $5 a month at patreon.com/everydayfi podcast. This is a one-woman show, so every little bit counts. See you next time as we continue to go down the path to financial freedom.